For about 12 years now, for 12 years, we have a program at our synagogue called the Melton School. It is ongoing study. There are somewhere about 150 students, more or less, 100 to 150 students. It's one of the largest programs of its kind in the United States. It's extraordinary. And for many of our students, they have studied with us for over a decade. It has really had a significant effect on this congregation. Once a year, we honor our Melton students by what we call our Melton Shabbat. And many of them are watching, I know, on screen, and they're going to have a Shabbat dinner. A challah was delivered to their home this afternoon, and they're going to have a beautiful Shabbat dinner collectively on a Zoom platform. The success of this program is overwhelmingly due to its director, Rabbi Strok, as well as Karen Goldenstein, who has been working with her for the last few years. And it's with joy and delight that I asked Rabbi Strok to join me on the bima for a little discussion about Torah and Jewish education. We thought it'd be most appropriate. By the way, all the Melton students are applauding right now from their homes. You can't hear them?
We have two here.
We have two students here, but we have, right. So I was thinking what to ask you, and we'll have a little dialogue here, if you will. I know that one of the reasons that Melton is so successful is because of its curriculum, and its curriculum has great texts, Torah, Talmud, Midrash. So I want to start with a question, and I know it's an unfair question, but I'm going to start with this question. Do you have a particularly favorite Torah text?
So that is a difficult question and a kind of an unfair question, but I will pick one text. One text comes to mind, which I have to start with an apology because it's Adar, and in the month of Adar, we are trying to increase in joy, and the text I'm going to choose is a little bit of a downer, but I'm going to connect it to Melton. There's the story after Aaron's sons died. There are two words that are very striking to me. The Torah tells us, Vayadom Aharon, and Aaron was silent. But it's not just a silence that's being quiet, it's a stunning, shattering, noisy kind of a silence. And it's very striking to me that that's the response that the Torah gives us. If my students have learned anything from me, one thing, what I hope that they've learned is that when we're suffering, when people around us are suffering, that we show up for each other, that we bear witness to the pain of one another. And it's not about what we say, because when bad things happen, it's not what we say, it's what we don't say, it's that we just show up. And that's a lesson that I really hope that I've been successful in communicating in the way in which we form community in every classroom. And that's why that text is meaningful to me.
So that's a Torah text. I know you're a Daf Yomi, you study Talmud every day as well. I also know, I mentioned that much of the success of the program is certainly because of you, and it's a great curriculum, but perhaps, and great students who are equally dedicated. But there's no question that the faculty plays an exceedingly key role. The students are in love with their faculty here. So I'm curious, when you study Talmud, have you learned anything in the Talmud about what makes an effective teacher?
Yes, so I study Talmud every day with my chavruta, Rabbi Karen Bender, and there's something that came up just in the past week or two that was really striking to me. And it's a text about teachers, and it says, what happens if there's a teacher who's not living their Torah? Should we learn from that teacher? And it says, the Talmud says no, that it's important that our teachers live their Judaism, that they're pure in their hearts. And I think what our faculty has in common, every person who's ever been on my team, past, present, is a person of integrity and a person who lives their Judaism. And so they're being role models, and the Torah that they teach is that living Torah. And if I may, there's one other text which is my very favorite text that I've studied so far, and I've shared it with my board and with my faculty, but not with my students at large. And it's a text that says, when a teacher of Torah, a righteous teacher, dies, that they don't need a marker on their grave. Because their students are their markers.
Wow.
They are the living markers. And that was so powerful to me that all the teachers I've ever had, and that my teachers and the students that they have, may my teachers live to be 120, but when they die, that every student that they've ever touched will be a living marker of the Torah that they've taught.
It's a powerful image. You know, I've often thought that too when I would work with faculty or have a choice of people who to hire, that the person who lived it wasn't theoretical to them. When they said Shabbat Shalom, they meant it. They were going. And I think in some ways it's almost a vital criteria. It can't just be what you aspire to. It's how you live your life. And that as a teacher is powerful. So when you're not doing Melton, when you're not overseeing the program, what do you do in your spare time?
As you know, one thing that I do is that I teach Musar. With the Center for Jewish Life. It's one of my favorite things that I do. I have 2 cohorts, one that's been with me 3 years and one 5 years. That's something that I love that I do. And another thing that I do is I teach a course at HUC for the past 5 years on Jewish values. And it's to Dalit students who are studying to be day school educators. We have some Dalit alumni who are teachers at the day school here and Dalit fellows here as well. So I do those 2 things, and then volunteer-wise, I am a mentor at the Hebrew Union College, something that I love to do. The college was such an important place for me, and it's nice to give back. And I also volunteer with a mental health organization. That's an issue very near and dear to my heart, and I teach a 12-week course, and I do that as well. And of course, I have to say, like, my most treasured role is that of the wife of my dear husband. We met more than 26 years ago, my partner, and my kids were in kindergarten and first grade when I started in Melton, and they're now a freshman and a sophomore in college, and so they are the great delights of my life.
Terrific, beautiful.
So I wonder if I can flip and ask you a few questions. So you asked me my favorite text of Torah, and I wonder for you, not to put you on the spot, but to ask
And
you...
not to put me on the spot, but how about
And I wonder if there's a text from this week's Parsha that you think would be particularly compelling for my Melton students and the community.
This week's Torah portion is Truma, which means offerings, right? And it's an interesting thing that happens. The Torah, just to put it in context, we are... the first half of Exodus is about, learning about our being enslaved in Egypt, the plagues, the Red Sea parting, the receiving of the Torah, more laws, and all of a sudden, in this week's Torah portion, everything shifts. And with the entire rest of the book of Exodus, with the exception of the incident with the golden calf, is all about the Mishkan, this tabernacle, this portable sanctuary that the Israelites are supposed to take with them as they traverse through the desert. And first of all, there's a pasuk, Vayasu, it says to the Israelites, make me a tabernacle, a sanctuary where I can dwell. And the first thing that tells me is, I don't know if that's my favorite part of this Torah portion, but what I love about that is it's saying to us, if you want to feel God's presence, you have to do something too. You have to build a place. You have to reach up for me, come close to God. So it's a two-way street. God's there, but it's not necessarily just going to happen to you. You have to do something to bring yourself closer. But the other thing that strikes me about this Torah portion, there is so much detail in how the Mishkan, the sanctuary is supposed to be, the tabernacle is supposed to be built. So God tells you, I think it's 20 cubits by 100 cubits and acacia wood and this color and that color and royal blue and the cherubim and all this stuff. And there's supposed to be 2 chambers and one is for the Holy of Holies. And And I kept thinking, why so much detail? I mean, why not just say to the Israelites, build me a tabernacle, you choose how to do it so that I can go along? And I thought about that. Any of you remodeled any part of your house? Or your kitchen, or you look at the options and the choices, you can go nuts. And that's with just you or maybe someone else in the house. Can you imagine all the Israelites, like a building committee? We would still be in the desert trying to figure out how to build this thing. So what that teaches me, I always ask the question, what is the Torah trying to teach me about life? How can I apply it to the way I live? What it teaches me, there are times when choices are a gift and times when choices are a burden. And sometimes not having choices can be good. I'll give you an example. When someone passes away, Judaism gives us something to dress the person in, called tachrikin. It's a shroud. Therefore, there's no arguments among the living ones as to what their beloved mother or father should wear. He should wear the blue suit. No, we like the black suit, this tie, that tie. I could see conflict being created when there are choices. Sometimes in life, to remove choices is a gift. By the way, it's done in retail all the time. You go to Costco, you don't have a lot of choices, and it makes life sometimes a little bit easier. One last point about the Torah portion, or just in general. For me, the rubber meets the road in the Torah when I learn something that I disagree with, something that doesn't set well with me. It's easy to embrace the Torah when you agree with it. But when you read a pasuk, when you read a verse that you disagree with or goes against the grain, I think a serious Jew can't just dismiss it, but has to grapple with it. There's no need for religion if it only reinforces what we believe. I sometimes look for what's that old line, that religion shouldn't just comfort the afflicted, it should afflict the comfortable. And sometimes I love Torah most when it afflicts me just a little bit. So that's the two insights about this week's parsha, which I think are particularly pertinent for everybody. Yeah.
So I have one other question. You
Okay.
once told me a story. I wonder if you could share it with the kahal, the congregation. You once told me a story about a teacher who taught you something about what it means to be an effective teacher.
Oh. My first 2 years, I took a lot of Talmud. It was like 6 hours a week in class. And my second year, I had a teacher named Dr. Eliezer Slamovich, alav shalom, of blessed memory. Dr. Slamovich was a Holocaust survivor from Hungary, and he was a real scholar, one of these people who grew up. I would ask him the most obscure Talmudic questions, just to see if I could sort of catch him, and he would, like a machine, repeat it to me verbatim what the Talmud was saying. I remember saying, Dr. Slamovich, how is it possible for you to know all of that? And he said, Dovidel, I study a lot. In any event, I didn't do very well in the midterm exam. I came in for the final exam, and the way the exam worked was he would sit across in a very small office, almost a cubicle. He would sit across the desk, and he would ask you to read the sugya, read the Talmud, translate it. Then he would ask you to translate Rashi's commentary and the Tosafot's commentary, et cetera, et cetera. I studied so hard for that final exam. And there's 40 minutes. The person in front of me left his office privately, and then I walked in. And the first thing he says to me is, how's your sister? Now, I had the good or bad fortune of having a brilliant academic sister who was younger than me, who had studied with Dr. Slamovich. She probably would have become a conservative rabbi. Were they ordaining women rabbis at the time? But she got a master's in rabbinics. And every teacher loved my sister because she was a stellar academician, unlike her older brother, who just was a reality. So he asked me about my sister and my family, blah, 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 blah. And I'm looking, and now I only have 20 minutes left. And I finally turned to him. I said, Dr. Slamovich, I just want to make sure there's time for the final exam. He said, oh, of course, of course. And again, it's all with a heavy Yiddish accent. And he hands me the shas, he hands me the pages of Talmud to read. I read them, I translate them, et cetera, et cetera. And he says to me, you did really well. You really learned a lot. You really, I'm proud of you. I mean, I literally get the chills now at this moment when I think about it. I got up, I walked out, and as I turned to leave, walking out the door, I started crying. I had tears in my eyes. And I didn't really know why, but I always like to try to analyze my own feelings. And I realized something. I wanted to show him how much I had learned. I wanted him to know that he had taught me so much. I didn't want to let him down. And that's when I realized one of the keys to being a great teacher is when your students want you to know how much you've shaped them and touched their soul. So I'm telling you this story 35 years later. And I don't remember a lot from my rabbinic studies, but I remember Dr. Slamovic, and I remember not so much of the Talmud itself that he taught me, but the Talmud that he lived and conveyed to me. You couldn't help fall in love with somebody like that, and if he was in love with Talmud, you ended up embracing Talmud as well. And he did it with joy and with humor, and my favorite teachings about study is from Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, who was the redactor of the Talmud. I love this line: only the learning that is enjoyed is learned well. So let's enjoy learning and let's learn a lot. Thank you. Thank you for those questions.